All right, and welcome back to Radio Wasteland. And tonight we have Tomás Prower rejoining us. You were here before for us for Queer Magic, and now we're going to be talking about Morbid Magic, which we discussed a little bit on the show and how interested we were in it. Death, spirituality, and culture from around the world. This is right up our alley. It's right up everybody's alley. But I guess a lot has changed for you since, you were last here. You got like a French edition, you got Audible versions, and then another book coming out, or at least another book approved. Is all that right?
It's all right. I mean, the silver lining of the quarantine is that it has a lot of people stuck indoors and they're buying all these books and they want to buy all these audiobooks. So Llewellyn's just having a very good time. Everyone's buying all the books, not just mine, but the whole catalog of stuff. So it's odd. It's odd how it's happening right now, but I don't complain.
I've been wondering how many industries in this pandemic, because everybody talks about all the ones it's going to hurt. And of course it hurts a lot of them. But I've been curious about which ones it's going to bring up. Is it going to bring reading back, audiobooks? Definitely some forms of online business are going to be coming back, So there might be a silver lining for some folks.
Yeah, Zoom's doing just fine.
Yeah, Zoom is doing just fine. Yeah. How many of us said that we should have bought stock in Zoom before all this happened?
Yeah.
All right. So, Tomas, why don't you give us a rundown of Morbid Magic, Death, Spirituality, and Culture from around the world? I'm sure we can pretty much guess what this is about, but why don't you give us a little more in-depth understanding of what this book is really about?
It follows on the heels of Queer Magic in that it goes around the world, throughout history, every single corner of the globe. But this time it's focused on death and the afterlife. So rather than, how queer people were treated or believed what magical powers they have, this is what did the cultures believe is in the afterlife? How did that affect their day-to-day? What are their funeral rites? What are their ghosts? What are the special magic spells to get into a heaven, to avoid a hell, to prevent, ghosts from coming back and haunting you? And it's all that underworld, dark side mystery from every culture around the world.
Right. And, are they that different? I mean, is human, because, okay, so when my kids were younger, we were talking about race and gender and all that stuff. And, my kids were trying to figure this out. And I drew three yellow circles and I put a blue dot in one of them. And I said, which one's different? And they said, oh, that one with the blue dot. And I'm all, yeah, but it's like 99% the same, right? Trying to make the point that humanity is really not all that different. And I really kind of have this view, but now I can ask you directly, is our view of death really all that different across the globe?
It really is, because it's that one question that no one has any definitive answers to. I mean, people have very strong beliefs about what happens after death, but a strong belief isn't the same as knowing. And so it's fascinating to see how all these cultures get super creative with, their own cultural history and trying to explain the unexplainable, what happens after death. And then people are so deathly afraid of it that it dictates their life and it influences culture in and of itself. So it's fascinating in a creative way, but at the end of the day, everyone's just scared.
John, so you still there? Oh, yeah.
I am.
You just froze for a second.
Oh, that's all right. Okay, so it says my internet connection is unstable. Means it's going to kill me in my sleep.
Yeah. Much like us.
So when I was reading about this book, I found out something about you I didn't know in the last one. You're a funeral industry insider.
I am. I'm actually a licensed mortuary professional.
What does that mean?
Right, exactly. Because usually people like to throw like, oh, he's a mortician or he's an undertaker or a funeral director. The only problem with that is every single state has completely different death laws and death legal things. So if I'm like promoting this like book and it's like, I'm a mortician, it means something completely legally different in Georgia than it does in California. So it doesn't make sense. So I just like the very complicated term of mortuary professional. Cause it saves me legal issues.
I see. So, what does that job entail? Are you My wife worked briefly at a mortuary. She was typing up the death certificates, and then she said she would have a hell of a time going around getting the doctors to sign them. And that was really the bulk of her job, was basically driving around town to get doctors to sign the death certificates that she had written up to get the process going. But there are also people there who are, for lack of a better understanding, party planners, and then there are people who do the embalming. I knew somebody who did the embalming.
Yeah, you got the party planners, you got the corpse taxidermists, you got all the people. Yeah.
Right. So what do you...
Clearly, we understand this industry very well.
What do you do there, and do you mind my asking you what you do there? I mean, I don't want to...
No, I love when people ask, because my soapbox moment is that too many people don't ask, and that allows the industry to get away with horribly shady stuff. So the more more
what are the goods?
But no, I love it when people ask. And it's what I mostly did was I went around and I got the doctor's signatures, because no one wants to sign off on stuff, because once their name is on there, if anything's wrong at all in the chain, they could lose their medical license.
Right.
So no one wants to touch that. But also I went and I retrieved the bodies. So I would go to all the hospitals, I would go to the coroners, I would go to the residences, pick them up, start the paperwork with the families. I'd be in the back of the house where I'd do the makeup, I'd do the physical assessments of the bodies. I didn't officially do the embalming because I wasn't California licensed for that.
Right.
But pretty much everything else, working the funerals, helping to set and plan them up. Because I was one of the few people at the mortuary that spoke Spanish. So I was always called up to the front, even though I worked more back of the house with the bodies. I was always called up to hey, we need to help you translate this. So I was like,
and you're in Southern California, right?
Yes, surprisingly, yeah.
So that really, I'm surprised that you were the only one that could speak it there in Southern California.
It's right. It's interesting because I also worked. I can't say the name, but I worked for a Catholic mortuary. So we got a lot of the Latino population. We got a lot of the Irish, the Italians, the Filipinos. Mm-hmm. So we that was our niche, and we had people, but we're always so busy that we could have 5 different funeral arrangers who speak Spanish, but we have 7 different families who speak Spanish that need help now. So you kind of just pull where you can.
Right.
I get you. So, one thing that I wanted to talk about was what happens to our bodies after we die, because I tell my wife that what I want is I want to own land. I want my dead body put in a box, a wooden box, and I want the wooden box buried, and I want some sort of bush, tree, or garden planted on top of me. She tells me that might not be legal. So what goes on, and it's different from state to state. We'll hit the rest of the world next, but let's just deal with the United States. What goes on with our bodies?
It varies completely differently in which state you live in, and then which county you live in, and then which city you live in. So I'm licensed in Nevada and California, so they're very different. So in Nevada, if you have your own plot of land out in the desert, you can do what you want, essentially. But if you're in California, you can't do that. And it's tricky because there's a lot of, the unfun answer is there's a lot of zoning laws that prevent you from that, because you could own your own property, but the ownership of property only goes so far deep into the soil. After that, it's, the state of California owns that, because that's where all the pipelines are. That's where all the electrical stuff is.
Water table.
You can't privately own that. So how far deep do you need to go? The other question is that prevents
2 feet. I'm good with 2 feet personally. But.
The other question is the zoning rights for it. No one's going to allow that in California, because even if you do it and you do it in your own backyard, the whole community is fine with it. How are you going to resell that house when there's a dead body in it? Some people might love it. Realtors aren't really happy about that, because it's hard to sell a body. It's hard to sell a house that has a dead body in it. It's hard to sell a house where a murder or a death has taken place. So there's an actual foreign corpse. It's not like it's your family's corpse. It's your family moved out. How are we going to sell this? That brings property value down, and it's just So a lot of places are against it. If you live in California, there's a program with the Joshua Tree National Desert where you can do that, and it's exactly non-embalming, just in the ground eco funeral, but you have to get on a waiting list.
I see.
And you have to be approved.
Interesting.
So
A
it's
waiting list. How does that work? I mean, what do they freeze you and thaw you out when you're ready, or?
it's a lot like body donations for science. Is if you die, a lot of people are like, oh, just donate my body to science. You can't do that because a lot of your body has to be right. You cannot die of certain things. You have to be certain qualifications. The company has to know, usually university has to know ahead of time. So all these death planning things, people have to plan way in advance if they want something other than the, cremation or the burial.
I see.
Right.
But the shady part is, if you go into a modern cemetery, you can't just be a box in the ground. You have to be, even if you're not embalmed with all the carcinogenic chemicals, you can't just go in the ground. You have to be in a certain steel casket, and then you have to buy and be buried inside a cement vault. And that has to go in the ground. Why? Because it allows maintenance to be cheaper. If there's a bunch of boxes and coffins in the soil becomes uneven, and that's harder to mow. So they make you buy this cement thing that keeps the topsoil even, so that the gardeners can just mow over it faster and more cheaply and not work overtime, which is also why you see a lot of cemeteries with those flat plaques instead of the tombstones. Tombstones are difficult to mow around, which makes costs go up.
Wow.
So, yeah, it's all
that is really, really sad. See, I always thought it was weird that they embalmed you and then put you in a metal casket so that you would last forever underground. It's like, if you just bury a body underground, first of all, okay, if you just bury a body underground, how long does it last? I mean, you're saying oh, we don't want to buy the house because there's a body under there, but I mean, wouldn't that be gone in 2 years?
Not the skeletal remains, because the skeleton has a lot of inorganic material in it, which is why archaeologists can find it up. It takes
that makes sense.
Long time for a skeleton to decompose into the earth. So you could not be told about it. You have your family, you're digging for a pool or you're digging for something. Suddenly there's the skeleton in there, and you're like, why didn't the realtor tell me? Why didn't the foreign family? Lawsuits start happening.
So that's just Chauncey.
Yeah, totally. Totally.
You thought he was to the left.
If I donate my organs, sorry, I know this is way off topic to the book, but I'm totally interested.
Oh, it's in.
So you got to put up with it. If I donate my organs, do I still get a funeral with a body? Do they fill me with hay, or how's that go?
Actually, what they do is, usually they only get parts of you. It's rarely the whole body. So usually you donate lungs, or you donate eyes, or you donate skin or your bones. The most extreme example is when people donate their bones. What the university does is they do their magic, and then they bring the body back. But where the bones are, it's like stiff wooden 2x4s in there. So you still have this puppet-like maneuverability with the body, but it's all a bunch of wood. And so
like that.
So you can have a funeral, you can have a viewing without anyone knowing that your bones aren't there.
Wow.
Yeah.
If I donate my body to science, is there any way to ensure that nurses aren't going to sit around and laugh at my junk?
If you die and you go to a mortuary, there's no guarantee of that either.
All right. Maybe I want to be cremated. I don't know. I don't know. What is the preferred way on an ecological? Is it cremation? Is that really the preferred ecological way to do this?
It's a tier thing. Getting embalmed is the worst thing. I mean, they're having problems in Ireland where after so many centuries of the embalming, the body's breaking down and the carcinogenic chemicals are seeping into the ground, which is seeping into the water supply.
Yeah.
So embalming is the worst. Cremation is better than embalming, but it takes so much gas, and all the CO2 goes up. And if you have any mercury fillings, it releases poisonous mercury into the air. So better than embalming, but not very good. The next step down is water cremation, which is only legal in a few states. I think it's Washington and maybe Minnesota. But you get cremated, except it's with this water lye solution. So there's no fire, there's no release into the atmosphere.
Dahmer style, Jeffrey Dahmer style.
Kind of, yeah. It is. It's actually kind of like that.
Yeah.
And then, but the best thing is just, body in a hole in the ground. But zoning regulations rarely allow that, unless you live.
That's weird. So why do we even still embalm bodies?
It's because it's predatory business. I mean, in all honesty, let's say a family comes to me and I'm like, oh, so you want to bury grandma in the ground with, there's bugs down there. There's dirt in there. Don't you want her to last? You've seen on TV how human bodies decay. Do you want grandma to look like that? And so it preys on fear of what death is, what dead body is. And the less people talk about death, the more removed we get from it, and the more death becomes this boogeyman of like, oh, corpses, skeletons, horrible things, not for me, not for mom, no, just have her, preserve her.
Right.
Interesting.
Seems a little more horrific to dig down there in 2 years and find grandma than it would be to find a decomposed body. But sorry, go ahead, Kara.
Yeah, well, I was just going to say, it seems like hearing this, the way we do death today in the U.S. seems like it's subject to a lot of sort of capitalistic pressures that would be the same everywhere. Is that the case, or are there still cultural differences today in terms of the way we do this?
There's still a lot of cultural differences. I know the U.S. takes it to the extreme because even in other English-speaking countries, embalming is not very popular. You still have the casket and you have the vault, but embalming is a very U.S. thing. We invented it, we promoted it, we started it to get bodies in the Civil War. Suddenly they're dying far, far, far distances. So we invented it to try and preserve the bodies to give Civil War funerals. But, I mean, it's becoming more capitalistic in different cultures. I know in China right now, the population's growing, space is growing limited. So if you live in Beijing or Shanghai, you don't have spaces to bury. So you do cremation, which is traditional. But there's no place there's no mausoleums, no places that can be dedicated to death because land is at such a premium. So a lot of families can't go and pay their ancestral respects to the bodies. So what they're inventing now in China is kind of like little Tamagotchis where you have a digital grave that the funeral home assigns you, and like taking care of a Tamagotchi pet. Time to clean, time to put offering on the grave, but it's all a digital like app. So you can continue the family legacy of honoring your ancestors, but it kind of fills that problem of there's no space and there's actually no place to honor your ancestors anymore. So it's happening around the world.
So you push a button to clean a digital space as though you're honoring your dead ancestors.
Yes.
Yeah.
Wow.
Huh. Well, that's a weird one. That's going to be a hard one for a lot of people here to swallow.
The U.S. is blessed with lots of land, so I don't see it being a problem here in the near future. But other places are having lots and lots of problems, especially smaller countries or very populated countries.
Well, I just watched a new series on Netflix based on the original Japanese movie that The Grudge was on, called Ju-on Origins or whatever.
Sure.
And she went to basically pay respects to somebody who had died, and she went into a place where it was like a library, multiple shelves, and on one shelf was an urn, and that was hers, and it was surrounded by all these other people who would go in there and pay respects to their urns, and I thought it was weird, but also kind of cool, and I figured that was a lack of space thing going on there.
It is. Japan's actually very advanced, surprise, surprise, very advanced technologically with it. They have these places, officially like in the business, all those urns in a big, bookcase. We call it a columbarium. And what they do is that you can go, you have this key card that you're given, by the funeral industry, by the columbarium. And you go in there, you see all the different urns, you put in your key card in the system, pull it out, and it kind of Tetris moves so that it brings your family's urn, the one attached to the key card, directly down to the face level. So you can have like a super high up in, the third story spot, how are you gonna, ever get in contact with that? They have it to where it's just motorized and it moves down.
It's like dry cleaning.
It's a lot like dry cleaning.
It's wild.
Yeah.
That is wild. All right. Well, let's talk about some of these ways that other people deal with death. I mean, here we've talked about the United States and how the United States deals with death. And I think we can all say that that's pretty weird, what we do with the bodies and how we do them. It's like, is there anything like cool, crazy out there? Like, I want to, ideally I'd be put on a raft and somebody would shoot a flaming arrow at me or something like that. Is anything in the industrialized world going on that's drastically different from what we do?
Yeah, there's two things especially that like I always love to say because they're so much fun. One of them, which is the complete, antithesis to the US funeral, is China, very rural China. And what they have is funeral strippers. And so let me explain this, but it's exactly what you're thinking.
Okay.
You have the casket, the casket up at the front, except there's, poles on the side, there's fog machines, there's lasers going on, and there's, prime time strippers doing their thing right next to the casket during the whole ceremony. Like, it's a spectacular show. And, you think of that and you're like, what? Why? That's so disrespectful. Not in China. Because the whole reverse is that, that Confucian filial piety is that you have to show honor in death. And so the more people that attend a funeral, regardless of reason, it shows that your father, your mother was that honored in society. So it's very important to fill seats at a funeral. They look at our funeral and they think that's so disrespectful. Close friends and family only. That's awful. Why would you do that to your ancestors? So to them, it's getting all that filial piety out. It's here. Look at this grand assembly of people. They're not there for the deceased, most likely, but it doesn't matter. It's this one event when you have to fill seats. And the more you do it, the more honor that's given to your dead relative in the afterlife.
Do kids go?
What?
Do kids go to these?
Yeah, I mean, you got to fill seats somehow. And
Holy smokes.
Officially, if you want all things being equal, it's not legal in China because the Chinese government sees that as like bourgeois decadence, unnecessarily worshiping death and superstition. So they actually have a hotline, a national Chinese hotline you can call to report funeral stripping wherever you are. And then the government will shut it down.
Yeah.
But it's just...
This is a story that keeps giving. This is just a rabbit hole.
Yeah, the guy working the phone, they're just all, listen, man, you've gotten 100 calls and not reported anything, but you've also taken 100 days off. We want to know where you've been going. Just be all, sweet, I'll be there. It's like, how weird is that?
Mm-hmm.
Huh.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
All right. So let's stick with China for the fun of it. How does China differ from the U.S. in the afterlife? I would say that the generic U.S. afterlife is heaven or nothing, right?
It depends. It could be heaven or hell if you're like in the
sure, heaven, hell, or nothing.
But yeah, it's that dichotomy of like good place, bad place. You can go to one of those.
Well, and then some of us maybe believe that we go nowhere.
There's always that option. Yeah.
What is, especially in China, who seems not too keen on religion on the whole, what is the general belief in China that happens to you when you die?
According to the Chinese government, nothing. Because, it's super secular. It's absolutely atheist country by law.
Right.
But that doesn't stop people from like believing in their own things or doing their own rituals. And what traditionally happened was it believes that there was a lot of reincarnation happening, especially when Buddhism hit China. So how a lot of people in the West see kind of like this physical world is like a training testing ground for the afterlife to prove you're good or prove you're bad.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
It's that kind of that same concept, except the Buddhist belief is that life is kind of pain and suffering, in that you're going to work jobs you don't want to do. You're going to have friends and family die. You're going to get sick. Life is going to be uncomfortable. It's not a happy place permanently. But you can escape from all that if you realize that life is an illusion. It's not real. Life only exists in your head. And if you can change the way you think, you can change the way you interact with the world. So you keep practicing that with every lifetime. And so the afterlife is, did you learn this lesson? Were you a good person? And if not, China had these 18 courts of hell or punishments, which is very Dante's Inferno, ironic punishments. Like, oh, you used to steal? Well, you're going to spend time with your hands on a super hot, intensely heated copper column and have them burned off forever.
Right.
Until we decide that you get another chance to go back into the real world. So it's the same thing, a lot of fear, but not fear that you'd forever be punished, but fear that you would be horrifically punished for a short amount of time. And if you were good, you'd never have to suffer again simply because you wouldn't be reborn again. So it's very different.
So is the concept of this sort of hell, see, even then, that's somewhat of a hell, somewhat of a purgatory. Is the concept of this hell purgatory pretty common across cultures?
Not really. It's very Christian, Islamic, and very East Asian.
So not so much in more what we would maybe consider tribal religions?
No, a lot of tribal religions have they kind of didn't want to ask the question and they let the mystery be. Because again, we have this luxury nowadays of, we have kind of comfortable lives where we can philosophize and think what would happen. But when your day to day is just trying to find food to survive, trying to find fresh water, trying not to die every second, and you and your family, you don't have that much time to think what happens after this because you're so focused on this.
Right.
They were just afraid of ghosts. They were afraid of something beyond our power, something supernatural is going to attack us. So if we don't show respect to this dead corpse, then they're going to come back to us. So again, it was survival for this world, tribally.
Yeah, so it's like, Daddy, what happens when we die? And it's shut up, kid, and keep digging that hole because we got to plant stuff.
It's actually a famous Confucian quote attributed to Confucius, where one of his students asked, "You say all these profound things, but you never say what happens in the afterlife and why you die. Why don't you talk about that?" And his like sassy response was, "Look, you can't even get this life straight. Why are you trying to ask what happens in the next one?"
That's always been my argument. Oh, I love it. That's always been my argument.
Yeah.
That we have a lot of people on this planet who, think they, coronavirus is a prime example. We got a bunch of people and they're just all like, well, I don't believe, Dr. Fauci because, he's just the top doctor. I mean, he's full, I believe Jerry, who works down the street at the shopping cart that basically knows everything about coronavirus. It's weird that I personally don't know how my phone works, yet I could be a person who could tell you absolutely what happens after you die, the meaning of life and how the universe started and all this stuff. I don't know how my phone works. We all got one. I sit next to it every day, but I can't tell you how it works, but I could tell you all this other stuff. I find it ridiculous, But I don't know. Maybe I'm an atheist. I don't think I'm an atheist, though. I think I'm agnostic. I think that I believe that there's a cosmic right and wrong, and I figure if there's a cosmic right and wrong, somebody had to say what was right and what was wrong. That's as far as I've gotten.
It's that question that everyone has an opinion to, but no one can definitively prove if they're right or wrong. So it's
right,
and people get entrenched in that. So it's tricky.
Yeah, they do. All right, well, we're coming up on break here. When we come back, we got Tomás Prower. We're talking about his book, Morbid Magic, Death, Spirituality, and Culture from Around the World, and we're going to address some of the magic that comes with death around the world. You're listening to Radio Wasteland. All right, welcome back to Radio Wasteland and our guest, Tomás Prower. We're talking about his book, Morbid Magic, Death, Spirituality, and Culture from Around the World. You got magic in the title. In one of the reviews of your book, I was reading that it said you're devoted to Santa Muerte. What is Santa Muerte?
Yes, a devotee of La Santa Muerte.
Was this accurate? It was just a review, so I don't know how
it's accurate. It's
okay.
accurate. A lot of reviews aren't accurate, but that one's accurate. Traditional like Mexican folk deity. If you picture like a deity of death, like Hades and all these other ones, La Santa Muerte is, if you imagine a Grim Reaper, but a female Grim Reaper. And rather than a deity of death, she is death. So it's not dominion of, but it's actual
like the personification
entity.
of.
Right, personification of death in a very Mexican Latino way. And
is she single?
What? Is she single?
Yeah, I don't know. I just, being an avatar of death, I find that very sexy. But go on, please.
You're mocking his religion. This is
nothing to do with anything.
This is not acceptable, Kara.
Oh no, La Santa Muerte is a very down girl. She like you can offer her.
Excellent.
You can offer her weed. She'll drink with you. You give her a smoke your long cigar. The thing is that she's very popular because she's death, and the popularity factor is that death doesn't judge you. Because usually in a lot of other religions, a deity has an agenda or a personality with a certain preference. Death doesn't care because, death doesn't care if you're a good person, bad person, young, old, or whatever. Death's going to take you.
All right. Death comes for us all.
Yeah. You have all these people in, traditional, very super conservative Mexican Catholic society. And if you're anything that's bad, you grow up and you think, oh, I can't pray to God. So if you're a prostitute, I can't pray to God to help me turn a trick. I can't pray to God to help me, smuggle these drugs. I can't help, all these morally ambiguous things, they go to death because death doesn't care. She'll help you murder someone. She'll help you, find your fix. She'll help you turn tricks. She'll help you find love. It doesn't matter. No moral compass whatsoever. She'll help you. And that's very refreshing, especially in Latino masculine Catholic society.
Right.
So she's my girl.
So on TV, I've seen several like cop shows and like documentary cop shows where they're talking about drug dealers and drug runners like worshiping, sort of evil spirits and stuff like that. This is really what they're referring to, I assume.
It is. It's very, very popular. It's very sensationalized because there's a lot of different faiths that the morally ambiguous do. But La Santa Muerte is just perfect for prime time television sensationalism.
Right.
Here are these immigrants with drugs and guns, and they worship a grim reaper of death, and they're coming for you. I mean, it's like clutch my pearls, they're coming for me.
Right.
Scary.
Yeah, well, especially in this, what's his name, post Donahue world. This I forget who the newscaster is that used to have the talk show. Geraldo Rivera world, and this Geraldo Rivera world. It seems pretty fitting that would be a target for sensationalized news. Okay, so magic having to do with death or the spirituality of death, here in the United States, we tend to have Christianity, various forms of that, and imported other religions, but a lot of them are Judeo-Christian based. Do we have any really weird death, spiritual, magical practices that are still going on here in the United States? We like to think of ourselves as better than the rest of the world. Do we have any of that here?
We do. It's very fringe and it's very underground. But one of the biggest ones I know that I've helped, arrange was, Santeria funerals. And it's a whole event because you cannot physically be there as a non-initiated outsider. There's we had to create, they had, the body, we had to put it in special white clothes, and we were given locks of hair that we had to put in certain places. That was during essentially when they became an initiate. They cut their hair, so it's all this stuff, garland crowned of flowers on their hair, and then a lot of secret, like, we can't tell you fully where we're going to hold this thing because we don't want to be persecuted. So it was a lot of secrets. Get information when you need information. And then when we were there, they took care of all the funerals. We brought it into a private home. We weren't allowed to ask any questions as per policy. And it was all just a big mystery. But what was later told to me, without saying too much, is that it's contacting the spirits that they align with. So their patron deities, the spirits that they worked with, and it's communicating with them saying, look, this vessel has died. Do you want to be buried with this vessel and continue with the physical manifestation? Or do you want to be released from this person and find new people in which to help? So it's a grief counseling ceremony for the spirits, telling them, look, this person has died. What do you want to do? We're here to help you. But it's all internally contained. And we're just kind of like, we have to be there because they can't take care of a dead body on their own for legal reasons.
Right.
It's fascinating. And that stuff like that happens all the time. It's just not talked about, or it's not offered, by the way, do you want a Santeria funeral? No funeral director is going to ask you that because it's so rare.
Right.
And you don't know how.
Plus, it's hard to mark that up. It's like.
But yeah, oh yeah.
So what about around the world? We sort of view magic as a joke or something for children. What about around the world? I assume that's not the case.
It's not. I mean, people are very, very superstitious. Even in here, they just don't admit it. But, you have like Taoist funerals in East Asia where when a person dies, before they can be buried, the soul is kind of super vulnerable and ghosts can attack the corpse and inhabit it and use it as like death puppets. And it's a whole thing. But so during a funeral, all the family has to like play all these dissonant music and like make a lot of noise, like just bang drums and do stuff because it scares the ghosts. So Taoist funerals are very loud, very it just sounds like a bunch of noise and people yelling and just hitting random chords. But it's to scare away the ghosts, otherwise their family member is gonna get possessed. Very real fear of that. So it's loud, grand affairs.
Well, that goes on in some aspects of Christianity, I want to say, with the birds and their souls or something, a bird taking their souls. I don't know. I get a lot of this stuff from horror films, so I might be making it up. I might be making it up. But so magic, or what we would, it's kind of hateful to use the word magic because, to these people it would just be spirituality, and Christianity to them would be its own brand of magic. Right. But what would we here consider to be another magical usage of or dealings with that situation? I assume. What about Europe? I kind of consider Eastern Europe to be kind of mysterious. The freaky Eastern Europeans. Well, I don't know. That's where Vlad the Impaler's from. There was some weird stuff going on there.
Eastern Europe is very interesting because they're currently dealing with a lot of internal things, but also they've had they've had a lot of forced communism being in the Eastern Bloc. So it's weird because they're they're trying to bring back traditions, but they're doing it in a very super nationalistic way, which might not be their tradition. It's like this forced upon way because the upper class says it's the most official way, and it's a whole mess. It's a whole mess.
Probably not too dissimilar from China in that sense, then, where these things might be outlawed or.
Yeah, because a lot of up and coming countries want to be taken seriously. So even in sub-Saharan Africa, Eastern Europe, all these up-and-coming countries, they think that if we practice these like ghost funerals or these things to scare away evil spirits and death, that the Western powers won't take us seriously. And so they're forcing themselves to be like the West in order to be taken seriously at the cost of their traditions.
That's
that does.
It makes sense, because I mean they're probably not wrong. Like historically, the West has been pretty
I think
prejudiced.
as long as you're not killing more people, it should be just fine. Who cares?
Yeah. I mean, but
it all comes down to the fact that we're playing with dead things,
True. It's true. One really interesting like cross connection was if you go to like the Scandinavian Viking culture, and the Aztecs, they had a very almost parallel belief of like what happened and the magic that is used and involved. Because a lot of people like to think that, a Viking longboat and then an arrow of fire is shot from shore and then poof, they're cremated. That never happened.
What?
That's all Hollywood. All Hollywood.
Oh no.
Because if you've been in the cremation business, a body needs a lot hotter heat for a longer time to be completely disintegrated.
That did cross my mind, like down the shore where a bunch of burnt up bodies washing up on the shore, and they're all, where the hell did these come from?
Yeah, so you have like this super powerful ruler who where we want his like burned corpse to wash back up on shore. It's like, that's not very respectful.
Right.
So it didn't happen. What they did was they had the whole longboat burial. We were buried in this giant longboat underground. The biggest fear was the afterlife, because in Aztec society and in Viking society, the default afterlife of like old age, sickness, it was a hellish like realm. It was just monotonous and boring and terrible. And so you didn't want to die. The only exception was if you died on the battle or from battlefield wounds. So it brought culture. Vikings constantly want to be out there in battle, constantly want to be fighting, because it's the only way to die and go to a heaven. And even when, like, ironically, if you're the best fighter, you're not going to die out in the battlefield, so you're going to survive, which is awful for you. So what they found evidence of is Vikings cutting themselves on their deathbed with like battle axes and like mutilating themselves to like fool the Valkyries that, oh, look, I died of these battle wounds. You need to take me to Valhalla.
Oh. What about women? Did they just automatically go to purgatory, or?
Women in Viking society were kind of like property and like not even talked of. We don't have too much evidence, but it's assumed that they did the same thing. We have evidence of, Viking chieftain females given all the regalia in Viking longboat funerals, but they're not talked about too much because they weren't very important.
Right.
In Aztec society, the best way for a woman to die was giving birth to a child. If she died in childbirth, boom, instant heaven, instant wonderful afterlife. So, you think about it like, how does that affect society? You constantly produce soldiers for the state. You constantly produce babies to increase your chance of going to heaven.
Yeah, I wonder if you could take that heaven back if that kid grew up to be a little bastard. You could be all like, nah. She's coming back, man. This kid sucks.
The sweet thing about Aztecs, though, is that despite how like intense they were about things, if a child was born with some sort of mental retardation or some sort of physical deformity that disallowed them from being a warrior, they were given an automatic pass into heaven. It's like, okay, we understand you can't fight for whatever reason. You just go to heaven. You get the good life.
Well, that's actually remarkably forgiving for a culture that supposedly killed something like 8,000 people in a day to grow their crops or something.
They got pretty intense because their whole belief is that they're alive because of the death of the gods. The gods gave their own blood to create, the Aztec society. So they have to constantly repay that blood debt. And there's all these like deaths and blood to try and keep the world going because they have to. They're indebted to the gods because of their death.
Yeah, I had no idea that they were so metal, essentially.
Yeah,
that's really hardcore.
Yeah. It's always weird to me. This is off topic, but it's always weird to me how these people come up with this stuff. It's like, how do you decide that the gods bled for us and now we're going to bleed tons of people for them?
Well, that kind of brings up another question, which is when you look at the earliest cultures that we know about, what were their beliefs? Like, how did this stuff sort of evolve over time?
You can only know so much about prehistory, but
Sure.
it's believed that ghosts, and again, fear of another supernatural force coming at you. I mean, you look at the very earliest times, if someone died, they're just kind of left in whatever position and the group would wander on.
Right.
But when you start seeing like flowers specifically buried with the body and the body's positioned a certain way, then you have to think there's something out there. So at the very least, there's always been a very human belief that something else is out there besides this physical world. Something else happens.
Mm-hmm.
That's as basic as we can get. But a lot of it is something else is out there, but we don't know what it is. Just to be sure it's not bad, we're going to honor this corpse because we don't know. So we're going to err on the side of ghosts not coming back to kill us.
All right. Yeah, well, I've always said that if one is a firm believer in evolution and nothing else, really the only motivations we have are, food, sex, and fear. That all the emotions that we have are basically just complex things built on top of that. And so if you go back there, it's probably just fear. Fear of that could happen to me. This could come back. Is this over? Because you think about that, you wonder how many people were buried who weren't dead yet, and who went through that sort of thing. Because wasn't there something in England with the bell and the rope, so that the people could pull the bell? Now, is this a movie thing or is this a real thing?
Oh, no, that's a real thing because even, scary fact, even today, the medical legal definition of death is very nebulous. Like, we don't fully know when death happens and life stops. And so it's very nebulous. Picture even, with less scientific knowledge back then, it's like, oh, they're dead. Go ahead and bury them. But they're just in a coma, or they're just have some sort of like thing going on that they couldn't explain back then.
Right.
You got to bury because again, there's no preservation techniques and a body is going to rot. And especially, back then they thought, oh, the rot will create the plague, or, oh, this miasma is going to come up and it's going to infect us. So you had to deal with death like immediately. So it's like, oh, he's dead, bury him. And it's like, oh, no, wait, he wasn't dead.
Yeah, better safe than sorry.
I'm curious about the ghost thing, though, because it sounds like this is something that's incredibly fundamental in terms of, burial rites and stuff. Gotta keep away the ghosts and stuff. But, like, that's just... Why? Why would people's mind go to this person might come back? Like, I don't know. That just seems like such a strange leap to me. Like, it makes sense now because we have the cultural context of ghosts, but who thought of that and why did everyone think of that? Why is it universal?
I don't know either. It's one of those eternal questions. My guess, though, is that it's the human not being able to comprehend existence without itself. So like when people think of like death, like nothing happens after death, they think a lot of times it's a blank void, like this eternal blackness. But you have to have a consciousness to even grasp eternal blankness. Mm-hmm. The idea of nothing, even the oblivion, you have to perceive it. So it's just beyond like us not existing. It's like, oh, we have to exist somehow. Things can't just end.
Yeah, no, that makes sense.
But who knows?
Yeah.
So, I always got to throw in a movie question, and we're not too far from the end here, so I got to get it in while I can. Have you ever seen White Zombie or Serpent in the Rainbow?
I've seen White Zombie.
Okay, so is there any historical evidence that you found? I realize you can't answer everything. One person can only research so much, but Serpent in the Rainbow is the same sort of concept that zombies are created through some sort of magic, and in Serpent in the Rainbow it was much more chemical than it was spiritual. And in White Zombie, it was much more spiritual. But is there anything to that, on an understanding level that we might have? Or does that even really go on?
It does. Well, it kind of goes on, and it is historical. Like there's even a whole part in the book about like Haitian zombies. So it happened and it's there. But the short answer is, it's the ultimate hell, because if you grew up in a slave plantation in Haiti, you have no power, and you know how like kids who are mistreated mistreat the pets and those that they have control over. A dead body essentially can't say no. So what happens is that you have this power over this corpse, and it's believed that if you can infuse it with magic, you can have your own slave, and you're finally a master, and you have power over someone. And so it was the ultimate taboo to become the monster, the slave master. You become the monster and you enslave your own, because you feel so powerless that you need to have control, but you are powerless. So the only control you can have is over the dead. So it's all psychologically in there, but there's like certain poisons that kind of like put your mind in a fog and make you very suggestible. So that was seen as zombie-esque. Again, accidental burials before they're actually dead is seen as zombie-esque.
Right.
But it's that fear of being powerless and needing to take power.
Well, that explains why it why it wasn't so prevalent across all cultures, and why it seemed to come heavily from slave cultures and stuff like that. That makes sense. I always wondered why
I never made that connection before. That's
so prevalent there and not other places. And I would suggest to you, if you haven't seen Serpent in the Rainbow, to watch that. You will be doing yourself a favor. Good quality movie, good quality topic. All right, so we're at the end here. Where can the audience get a copy of Morbid Magic, Death, Spirituality, and Culture from Around the World by Tomás Prower? Let me say that out loud just in case they're searching for it, but where can they get it?
Everywhere fine books are sold. I mean, I'd say support your local bookstore. If not, get it from Barnes & Noble. If not, get it from Amazon. But yeah, if you can find it, and if you can Google either my name or Morbid Magic, you'll find it.
Yeah, and we just scratched the surface here, so I imagine so much more to.
Yeah, and then just a reminder, you have several of your books out in audiobook, a French version of this book for anybody who's got French friends who listen to English podcasts. I'm sure that's a small market, but just in case. And what's your next book coming out again too? Let's cover that again.
It's still in production, so we're thinking maybe late 2021. Mm-hmm. Who knows with COVID? Maybe early 2022. But later on next year, because the process is happening. It's another around the world topic. I can't say it, but it's another delve into the international taboo of the things people don't talk about, but everyone practices on a spiritual level.
Sounds good. The international practice of going to the bathroom.
I'll bet it's cooler than that.
Things that only my mother-in-law talk about incessantly. Yeah. All right. You've been listening to Radio Wasteland. You've been listening to Tomás Prower here. We've been talking about his book, Morbid Magic, Death, Spirituality, and Culture from Around the World. Buy it wherever fine books are sold, or buy it at Barnes & Noble and Amazon. But start locally first. And you've been listening to Radio Wasteland.